Epilogue. Aromatic tea and baked snacks with plenty of butter. A moderately stimulating incense that drew out the richest notes of the sweet smell. Empress Gyokuyu hosted, and her guests came to be entertained. She'd held many tea parties during her days in the rear palace, but fewer since she had gone from consort to empress. She was confident, however, that her ability to coddle a visitor had not diminished. "Thank you ever so much for inviting us," one of the women said. They were the wives of some of the most important people in Lee. They were all older than Gyokuyu, with one exception, her niece, Yakin. "And who might this be?" a sharp-eyed guest asked upon spotting her. "My niece," Gyokuyu replied with a smile. "She's joined us all the way from the western capital." Yakin had still not entered the rear palace, as not only Gyokuyu but Gyokuin had objected to her doing so. Gyokuyu's father and her brother wanted different things. This realization made her even less hesitant to act. She had introduced the girl not as Gyokuyu's daughter, but as her niece. Nobody would know Gyokuyu as the governor of the far-off western reaches. He was known in the capital as Gyokuin's son, and little more. Anyway, Yakin resembled Gyokuyu more than she did Gyokuyu. No doubt people would conclude that she was Gyokuyu's niece on her mother's side. They talked about the most popular perfumes, imported velvet, the newest makeup, subjects that were a bit juvenile considering the age bracket of the attendees. Partly, Gyokuyu deliberately brought up these subjects so that Yakin, who wasn't used to these sorts of functions yet, would feel comfortable, but it also served to allow her to avoid political discussions. The main objective today was not to strengthen her ties with these women. In fact, she had gone out of her way to invite well-heeled wives who didn't display too much ambition. Over these past several months, Yakin had begun to open up to Gyokuyu. As Gyokuyu had suspected, she was adopted, not her half-brother's blood child. He must have decided that the emperor's choice of Gyokuyu as his empress showed that the ruler had a thing for exotic-looking women. Gyokuyu could only laugh. The emperor was not a man who would choose his empress for her looks alone. They might have been a factor, of course, but not enough for him to fall madly in love. Gyokuyu might have the imperial affection, but she was not the kind who could bring a country to its knees. Her father Gyokuin understood his majesty well. That was why he hadn't offered a young Gyokuyu to the previous emperor. He had waited, using the time until the throne changed hands to give Gyokuyu the education she would need to be empress. He was a merchant, Gyokuin. He would choose the path of greatest profit. He would not be distracted by avarice, though he would look 10, 20, 50 years into the future. Even beyond his own death. He would seek more than the modest glory of one clan, Gyokuyu knew. Gyokuyu had faith that Gyokuin loved her. But his love was not unconditional. If she became a hindrance to his pursuit of gain, he would cut her loose. What Gyokuyu could do was raise her own value, make herself weigh heavier in Gyokuin's scales. This tea party was one way she could do that. The party concluded amid a convivial atmosphere. The wives showed great interest in the curious trade goods from the West. Gyokuyu would have to make presents of them soon. She ordered her ladies-in-waiting to clean up, then went back to her room, accompanied by Yakin. "You seem to be learning how to handle yourself at a tea party," Gyokuyu observed. "Yes, only thanks to you. At first, you couldn't bring yourself to say a word." She chuckled. "Please, I beg you, don't remind me." Yakin was lovely, true enough, but she was ultimately still a makeshift daughter. She could make herself sound aristocratic for a few minutes of brief conversation, but much longer than that and her ISEI twang started to come out. Gyokuyu would probably still have the same problem if Hongyang hadn't corrected her every time her own accent had shown itself ever since she was young. The accent made Yakin less than suitable for tea parties. In the end, she had been offered up for one purpose, to gain the romantic interest of the nobility. "Lady Gyokuyu, may I ask you something?" Yakin said. "Go ahead. How fares ISEI province now?" The young woman couldn't hide her anxiety. "Why do you ask? Does something there worry you?" Gyokuyu asked bluntly. After a second Yakin replied, "The bugs must be coming soon. I fear for the crop." She was a very direct young woman, kind at heart, and a quick study. Gyokuyu sympathized with her. It had been 10 days or so before that Yakin had opened up to Gyokuyu about her real parents, a subject she had no doubt intended to keep strictly to herself. This girl, so much like Gyokuyu, had a deep respect for Gyokuoyu. In her former life, her family had been nomads, but when her father grew ill, they settled in a farming village. Of course, that didn't immediately make them proficient farmers. They let the livestock pasture in a nearby field, and bit by bit they learned how to farm. She described with evident gratitude how the governor had supported them monetarily. The governor, Gyokuoyu. Gyokuoyu was not evil in Gyokuyu's eyes. He simply believed he was always right. Always just. That was why they didn't get along. She, favored by Gyokuin, contravened his justice. Of this she was well aware. He was the eldest son, by Gyokuin's official wife. If he looked down on a girl born later to a concubine, well, that was hardly unique to Isei province. Most men in Li would have done the same. No, what bothered Gyokuyu was how Gyokuoyu denigrated her appearance. Not her face as such, this wasn't about whether she was beautiful or ugly. Instead he belittled her red hair, her green eyes. He was a merchant's son, the one who was supposed to help the Western capital flourish as a nexus of trade in the future. Not the best vocation for a xenophobe. Gyokuin's policy was in general to be a good neighbor to foreigners. Gyokuyu didn't understand how Gyokuoyu could respect their father so much while turning his back on one of his most important teachings. This was the man Yakin so deeply admired. Some years before, she had been forced to sell herself on account of a bad harvest. Selling a daughter was hardly unheard of. Women were just another commodity in poor households. She'd begun to work as a prostitute. This was the situation from which Gyokuoyu had plucked Yakin, adopting her as his daughter. A beautiful story, Gyokuyu thought. She chose not to say what was behind it. She would not tell Yakin the truth of the matter. She believed it was part of her strength that she did not undermine the girl. I certainly think we can expect to hear something from the Western capital soon. I'll tell you the moment I learn anything, Gyokuyu said. Then she pulled a hair stick from Yakin's hair. Feeling her head get lighter, Yakin let out a breath. Now get changed, and let's start on our studies. Learning, that's the most important thing you can do to be of help to my honored brother. Yes, Yakin was obedient, a good girl. She respected Gyokuoyu and worried even for the family who had sold her. Even though they had no doubt received more than enough silver to live on from Gyokuoyu to keep their mouths shut. As Yakin left the room to go change, Hakuyu entered holding a crumpled piece of paper. Lady Gyokuyu, she said. She gave Gyokuyu the paper, which had been folded and twisted so it could travel by pigeon. This particular missive seemed to have been treated even more roughly than usual. Gyokuyu looked at the bird, wondering if it was the one the Moon Prince normally used, but no. This message had come from someone other than His Majesty's younger brother. Is this? Yes, Hakuyu had read it already, it seemed. The message contained word that the Western capital, in fact, all of Isei province, was beset by a plague of insects. The messy handwriting bespoke the urgency with which it had been written. Gyokuyu clenched her jaw. Hakuyu, I have one message prepared to go by land and another by sea. We have one messenger bird left, if you wish to use it. The Western capital is still in confusion, however, and I question whether it would arrive safely. Even so, it would be far faster than sending word by human hands. The bird, please, Gyokuyu said. Then she took out a piece of particularly sturdy paper. On it she wrote only a single sentence, as you will. Then she tucked the letter in some oil paper, attached it to the leg of the pigeon Hakuyu had brought, and released the bird. The white creature looked perfect against the bright blue sky. The sky was so blue here in the central region, in fact, that it was almost hard to imagine that far to the west, it was being blotted out by insects, the bugs ravaging the crop and supplies. Those who couldn't imagine it might sneer to themselves, what a bunch of crybabies, those Westerners. Ooh. The bugs are going to get me. Boo-hoo-hoo. Gyokuyu let out a great sigh. Why had she entered the rear palace? For what? Why had her father seen fit to send her here, to the country's central region? Would Gyokuyu's father continue to love her long into the future? All right. Gyokuyu almost gave herself a slap on the cheek for energy, but Hakuyu stopped her. Your inner tomboy is showing. Not on the face, please. Yes. Yes, and try to sound like you mean it when you answer. Hakuyu, her friend from childhood, looked at her sternly. Gyokuyu took out a new sheet of paper and began writing down what she could do for the western region. Her fight was just beginning.